We can now bring in France 24's foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert, who was listening to what Mark Rutte had to say. Doug, let's start with what he had to say about allies agreeing to up U.S. weapons deliveries to Ukraine. This is something that Donald Trump wants. He wants to see NATO members pay for American weaponry to send to Ukraine. What did he have to say about that?
Well, what he had to say about that is very different than that. Meaning his words are sort of at odds with the actual reality of what we see on the ground right now, Delano. And coming out of this press conference, if you're just a viewer tuning into it, you might be forgiven for saying, well, that was clear as mud, because it is. You know, he spoke in big, grandiloquent terms of, additional anti-drone measures, responding to hybrid threats, testing integrated systems. It sounds grandiose.
Yeah.
What's happening on the ground? You know that back earlier over the summer, you had basically NATO and Donald Trump striking this sort of ad hoc deal under which the U.S., which had already been retreating from the Ukraine war effort since early 2025, it basically stopped providing new weapon systems and new arms and ammunition to Ukraine. Instead, under this sort of deal that was struck, the U.S. would sell its weapons to Europe, to NATO allies, to European members, EU members. And in turn, EU would then donate those weapons to Ukraine. So there was no direct supplying of weapons as had been done under the Biden administration to Ukraine. So how has that been going, that program? Okay, so it hasn't. There has been a dramatic plunge, and I have to use the word plunge, in the level of Western support, military support, European military support to Ukraine in July and August. In fact, the Kiel Institute, based in Germany, which tracks the level of support to Ukraine, both in terms of humanitarian, military, and financial support, purely looking at weapons deliveries, said that in July and August, it plummeted, the level of support, 43% compared to the first 6 months of this year, from January to June. So July and August, what's that about? What that's about, Delano, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, is European countries are not buying those weapons at the levels perhaps that some had hoped for from the U.S. under this ad hoc deal. And therefore, they're not going on and being supplied to Ukraine. In fact, to date, there's been about $2 billion in 4 separate packages of arms that have been sent from Europe to Ukraine. That is far below what Ukraine says it needs in terms of both missiles, but also, more importantly, air defense, critical air defense, at a time, as you heard Mark Rutte say, we are seeing a rising, more rapid frequency of these strikes against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. As winter approaches, Ukraine is desperate. It's not getting the level of aid it needs. Now, is there a silver lining in this? Am I going to just be doom and gloom here? Not entirely. There is an acknowledgement that aid is low. There is an acknowledgement that they need to drum up more military support here and now, not tomorrow, not in a week, now for Ukraine. And so we're hearing things. Estonia is now going to come on board. Small country, but still symbolically important. The countries that have been really coughing up the cash, the weapons, the doing things have been mainly the northern ones. We've seen Norway and Sweden and Denmark in on the game a little bit, the Netherlands as well. Less taking more of a standoffish approach in terms of this U.S. buying U.S. weapons and giving them to Ukraine. Britain, France, Spain, Italy have not been as fully involved in this effort. Doesn't mean they might not be. And yes, France has, on other fronts, supplied Rafale fighters to defend Polish airspace from Russian drone incursions, as has Germany, sending Eurofighters to Poland. But on this particular front, when it comes to Ukraine, they haven't been able to really raise their game yet. That's why this is so crucial. And you wouldn't know that from listening to Mark Rutte today.
Because it seems like this whole plan was thought of by the U.S. President Donald Trump for the American arms industry, when Emmanuel Macron has been talking about European defense and strengthening European defense. So you can understand the reluctance from European
That's exactly
players.
what it is with France. He doesn't want to have to buy the weapons from the U.S. He wants to support the European homegrown defense industry.
I need to ask you about an important meeting at the end of the week, which Mark Rutte touched upon. We're going to have the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who's going to be back in Washington once
Friday.
again, his third visit, I believe, in just a matter of months. What one of the main things that he will be looking to get out of this is America selling these Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. If Washington does go ahead and gives its go ahead, how much of a game changer will that be on the battlefield? This as Donald Trump struggles to bring that war to an end. I mean, he's gone down the Middle East.
Let me just jump in. Let's reel that in a little bit, okay? Fishing rod here. The Tomahawk talk, right? There was a question about it from one of the reporters because there is so much speculation and uncertainty. What is it all based on? Why are we sitting here talking about Tomahawks? Because Donald Trump is exasperated with Vladimir Putin, who has not shown himself willing to compromise in this war, right? Donald Trump is fresh from what he says is this triumph in bringing eternal, quote, eternal peace to the Mideast, right? Yet he has been unable to do anything even approaching that with regard to Vladimir Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine. He is more and more enraged, exasperated with a man that he had called a friend and still actually did recently refer to as his friend, right? Invited him to Alaska. So what does he do? Donald Trump does what he does in these situations. He throws something out. It's part of his sort of, push and pull tactics in deal making as he sees it. He mentions Tomahawks. Tomahawks are U.S.-made long-range missiles, which can strike deep into Ukraine. Remember, under the Biden administration, Biden was always very reluctant at every step of the way to supply these types of long-range missiles to Ukraine. Why? Because the common cliche was because
it's a red line.
It would be a red line. It would lead to escalation and a souring of relations with Russia, to which critics says, how could the relations get any more sour? What do you mean escalating with Russia? It's already escalated.
Yeah.
So that was the response. But the Tomahawks would be by far the longest range missiles. Right now, they would go up to 5 times further into Russian territory than the longest range missiles that Kiev right now has. But let's be clear about this. And yeah, they would potentially be able to reach Moscow. It would be that long in their actual traveling range. But let's be clear. This is right now talk. This is a threat by Donald Trump. It is rhetorical in many respects. Does it mean it won't happen? No. Tomorrow we could wake up and all of a sudden he's giving Tomahawks to Ukraine. But it means that we have to put it in the context of a Donald Trump negotiating tactic. He might very well strike some sort of deal with Zelensky, but I'll say one thing. With Tomahawk missiles, given the complexities and the technicalities and the logistical difficulties, it's not just the missiles that Ukraine would need. It would need the special U.S.-made launchers to launch those missiles from Ukrainian territory. It's not like a missile's there and go. It's a part of a whole system. Whether or not Donald Trump did the deep dive into the details when he threw out the Tomahawks remark, who knows? Maybe he's literally a rocket scientist and knows it all. But I suspect he didn't. He threw out Tomahawks probably as a negotiating bone, a threat to Vladimir Putin. But I'll tell you, Moscow's already pushing back. They're saying this would be a clear escalation.
But they've said that for everything.
They say for everything, and they're not going to change their behavior.
They said that for jets as well.
Absolutely. But Delana, I'll just note, there has not been a single instance in which Moscow, Vladimir Putin, has modified his behavior and his conduct, his way of waging this war in response to U.S. weapon supplies to Ukraine. This is the latest in a series of, if you do this, we will do this. That's it.
Because, Doug, the risk is we're already in, the middle of October now. The winter is going to set in, and we're essentially going to have this conflict frozen for the rest of winter.
Except it won't be frozen because you will have more and more drones, according to military experts and those who are following this war, like the Institute for the Study of War, tracking, saying we have already been seeing hundreds and hundreds, approaching 1,000 drones a night in some of these waves. It could get up, those swarms of drones, as we call it, could get up to maybe upwards of 2,000 a night. That, I think, was an earlier estimate from a few months back. But what we're seeing is Russia far from diminishing the quantity of drones that it is firing in Ukraine's direction. It's ramping it up. It's ramping up its production. And the message from Moscow is, if you think we are going to feel it all deterred, we are still going to end this war on our terms. We are going to wage it as we see fit. We are going to address what we see as the, quote, root causes of this conflict. Nothing is going to stop us, and nothing is going to slow us down. The sweet words from Mark Rutte, all of the noble words about helping Ukraine and the Western military support. Putin's playing the clock. Ukrainians, some officials have said that they see this war, perhaps they see having to have enough supplies for about 3 years to continue. They're at least planning along a 3-year timeline.
I mean, they're in it
which
for
is
the
a
long
far goal.
game,
They are in it for the long game
Yeah.
because they know that Putin is in it for the long game and
don't
is not
forget,
going to stop.
he has that access with North Korea, which is only going to cement itself further
Absolutely.
and further.
It's clashing narratives. That's all. Putin is not going to stop. That's the bottom line from this. And NATO's Western support, the Western support is dwindling.
We'll see what